this is a book launch, and therefore its functions are to celebrate a book, its editors, and the contributors. And there is a subsidiary function, which is to encourage you, all of you 97 people, to buy the damn thing. You can get it on Amazon, or you can go to the Chiron website. For those who are not Jungian, Chiron, Chiron. The book is called Breakfast at Küsnacht, Conversations on C.G. Jung and Beyond. Stefano is the editor, and he has assembled a group of contributors, some of whom are on this virtual book launch. One or two people have written to me. By the way, what I'm seeing at the moment is Marianne.
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure that's quite right, Paul, but I guess it doesn't matter.
You can
Go for gallery view.
Yeah, I'll go to gallery view.
Although that may give you everything.
Okay, thank you. Some of you have written to me asking, what is Küsnacht? Where is Küsnacht? And even who is Küsnacht? Küsnacht is a small town outside Zurich where Jung lived in a street called Seestrasse, and where the C.G. Jung Institute is in operation. It's a beautiful small town right on the lake of Zurich. And I think that it reflects Stefano's orientation to life, that he wanted to place this work in this Jungian town. I'm going to start by talking and conversing with Stefano, and then I'll open it up to the contributors who have very kindly agreed to participate this evening. What I'm going to do in every case is quote to the person I'm talking to what they have said in the book, not long quotes, short quotes, and ask them to expand, to withdraw, or just to leave it as it is. Stefano, you said on page 9, I began each interview by asking them about the central steps of their intellectual biography and journey, and which authors or research areas they consider essential for their own development and work. Let me ask you exactly the same question, and then later we'll talk about the world situation in which we are living at the moment. What about your own intellectual biography? Which authors do you consider essential for your own development?
I wish you told me this, because I'm totally unprepared now and quite emotional. Well, obviously one has to say Jung. Yeah, Jung has been part of my training in the past 5 years. I'm in love with poetry. I was always in love with poetry since primary school. Two very important poets, Italian poets, are Giovanni Rabboni and Maurizio Cucchi, which are not famous abroad Italy, and two very important female authors, Amelia Rosselli, also a poet, and everything started from poetry. That's why then I studied literature and philosophy. There, thanks to my literature teacher at high school, I met Thomas Bernhard. Thomas Bernhard is another pillar of my education, which seems pretty negative, pretty depressive, but I think he has very important inward look into what other authors have an outward look. I would say these are the four authors that are very, very important. Of course, Jung. Why Jung? Because Jung was able, I think I wrote in different papers, and especially in my PhD, that he was able, as a psychiatrist, to do something that no one else did. So to go into himself with the Red Book and really become creative in a very, very difficult time. I compare the Red Book to Dante's Divine Comedy, which is a big comparison. But I think the Red Book is a very, very important and useful tool if you want to understand what is the psyche and the soul.
Well, tell me something about psychosocial studies.
Yeah.
Because in your introduction, it's really remarkable. I counted many, many times you use this expression, psychosocial studies. And I think that your background idea is that Jung is a psychosocial author in many ways, which means that he's in this area, as he was in so many areas, he's ahead of his time, he's a precursor, he's a pioneer in this field of psychosocial studies. Have I got it right or not right?
Absolutely, as well as if we look at relational psychoanalysis. Let me tell you something personal. Before to decide to train as a psychoanalyst, these things happened roughly 5, 6 years ago. I built my career, as I said, literature and philosophy, and then I focused on sociology. Before at Manchester University and then at Cambridge. There I worked with John Thompson, who is the right hand to Tony Giddens, who you know very well. And I wanted to do my PhD in that stuff, working on Ulrich Beck. But then I had to leave for 2 reasons. Once, because I was depressed after my year at Cambridge. I had to stop everything. I couldn't go on. And the second reason is that I was not ready to conclude my PhD because something was missing. My question was, how do people become themselves, I would say right now. But I was looking at this question from a sociological point of view. Only going through my therapy, Jungian therapy, I then came to the conclusion that what I was missing was the psychological part, the psychoanalytical part. That's why when I look at my PhD, I came to the conclusion that psychosocial studies are very important because everything is psychic and social. Also, Susie, who is here tonight, underlines these very well. You underline these very well in your work on politics. I mean, we cannot distinguish psyche and the society. Many Jungians will say, no, Jung was not interested in society. While following Orbach, I would say, yes, he was.
I have another question for you. Sorry to move around, but you don't have a lot of time. Why conversations? Why are you drawn as a person to conversation? Because there's not only this book, you have done interviews which are on YouTube, and you've been one of the team that set up these salons, which are in a sense conversational. What is it about you that is in love with conversation, Steph?
Oh, I don't know. I think Verena and Marianne and even Paul and John can answer this question better. But I think it's very important to record the voice of the senior analyst. Jung did it with an interview at the BBC. There are a couple of interviews from Bon France. But I think my generation as new ancestors, as underlined in the book, Jung is an ancestor, Hillman is an ancestor, von Franz is an ancestor. Who are the ancestors of my generation? This is what I wanted to do through a conversation. Obviously, the best bit of the conversation are not recorded. Here is stored so much stuff that I cannot share, information, gossip. But what I wanted to do at the beginning of 2016 was to record the voice of those that have spent 40, 50 years in this field, and I have a lot to say. My initial idea, Andrew, was very crazy. I wanted to have 5 minutes Facebook Live answering 2 questions: who is Carl Gustav Jung and what is his relevance today? The first person I asked to be my partner in this project was Wolfgang Gigerich. He looked at me and said, well, 5 minutes are not enough for me. I could write a book and I will never do an interview. Then I said, okay, let's keep on asking. And Dr. Ribi opened the door of his house to me. We spoke for 3 hours. It was the first interview, and then I had many, many, many others. The only pity is that there are only few women. Men say, yes, let's do it. But women says, I don't know, let me think. So I'm really thankful to all the women that said yes, and also the women that came in for the COVID-19 interviews.
What's it like being interviewed right now?
Oh, I don't like it, especially because you didn't tell me the question. So I'm very nervous about the next question.
Oh, come on, that's hopeless. What's it like? What's this evening like for you?
For me, it's special because 5 years ago, I would have never thought that 5 years after, a couple of months after my graduation, I would be here with Parterre des Rois, or the head of queens, you know, with you, with Verena, who is the past president at the Carl Gustav Jung Institute in Zurich, and it is really my alma mater. It's such a dear place. Everything started from there. Everything started from Jung, everything started from the psychological club. So it's special also that Marianne is there, Susie is there, Paul and John.
Do you have any lines from these poets that you could give us? In Italian is fine, but English would of course be helpful. But can you record anything? This is a terrible question to throw. I know you're emotional and so on. But
it is. I have a poem from Giovanni Rabboni, which perhaps is the most important poem for me. He says somehow, if you don't want that what happened to you will happen to others, stand up and speak up. And I think this is very much in line with what is happening right now in the world, isn't it? Is in line with what you and Susie have been doing in the past 40, 50 years, being a psychotherapist and also being an activist.
That's a very good answer. And you've kind of anticipated my last question, which was going to be, what's it like to do a book launch of all things at this moment in time? And I think standing up is a good answer. And let's hope that the book launch steers a balanced path between being about a book that was conceived pre-virus and a book that may well be relevant now. Thanks, Stefano. That's the end of...
No, let me add one thing on this, Andrew. Sure. Because what is to have a book launch like this? First is online. I don't know if we are already 100 or more or less 100, but it's amazing. My family is there, my friends from Italy, from Spain, new friends, colleagues from almost everywhere in the world. And you and I planned these in the past few weeks, and we thought a book launch in peace times. Then you and I today said, well, let's revise it. But there are many people saying the world has gone mad, the world is out of joint, as sociologist Ulrich Beck said. I don't think the world has gone mad. I don't think the word is out of joint. The word is. And perhaps instead of using Hegel as Beck used to do, we should use Shakespeare and Agnes Eller in this book. The time is out of joint, not the word is out of joint. And before you let the others speak, let me read one thing which I sense is very important. The time is out of joint. Time is out of joint when reason and unreason are heterogeneous, when actors do not understand what they are doing and understand even less what others are doing or have done.
Yes.
I think this is a good picture of what is going on right now, isn't it?
Hearing you say these things makes me want to use the words I had prepared for the end of the Holy the whole evening. We love you and we respect you because Jungian analysis, and indeed psychoanalysis, is a little geriatric. And you, as a young man, and you've been doing it for some years, so it's not just today, have started to comprehend and shape this elderly field in a very new way. And I think the book is the beginning, it's not the end. And this would be the point, if we were live, where we would applaud you for your initiative, for your energy, for your originality, and your courage. I now move on to have a few words with the first of the contributors to the book, which is Paul Attinello. I'm not going to give biography. I leave it to Paul to say anything about himself that he wants. Paul, on page 30 of your chapter, which is entitled C.G. Jung and Thinking About HIV/AIDS, Stefano says to you, AIDS is back. Berlin is very open, very libertine, a little bit the way you describe San Francisco. You wrote about the aging patients. As an aging patient, why do you think AIDS is coming back, if it is coming back? And Paul, you answered, I don't think it's coming back among the aging patients. I think we're sort of a different group. I think it, that is HIV/AIDS, is coming back among the uninfected, among the uninfected. Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
Well, this is something that appears and disappears from the news from time to time. People get careless, or habits change, or patterns of the way they approach HIV/AIDS change. It's usually most noticeable in the gay male community, just because that tends to be a community that speaks openly about it. Other people in most of the urban West are seen statistically and are treated sort of statistically, of course. So I think it's something I'm constantly seeing in the last, for me, I'm probably infected in 1981-82. I'm diagnosed in April 1987. So this is basically my whole life, right? And to turn it into something that is meaningful, I've tried in about 42 different ways in the last few decades. It's been really interesting that just in the last 4 or 5 years, I found something that really made sense to me.
Which was?
Well, I ended up doing my thesis, The Passionate Body. I did it for Dr. Kast. She knows it's pretty flimsy. I'm going to work on it to get it better as a book, but working on another book related to that with you, and discovering that I knew what I was doing and putting the passionate body at the center of it, which for me, I'm a 63-year-old gay man living in Northern England, far from a lot of my friends, in a gay community that is nice, but not exciting. And I've lived alone for 18 years, and that's boring. If I regard myself as someone who has a passionate body, the body that wants to live, the body that wants to create things and make things, and for me, this was a huge reversal. It really was. It really shook me up in a wonderful way. And I still, I'm sure all of you, because of course I've only been seeing patients for 10 years. Pardon me, 6 years. What am I saying? I'm sure all of you who've been analysts for a very long time, this is very familiar. When your life retroactively completely changes meaning. And this very strange sense that I seem to be a dad now, a granddad in the gay community here, in the HIV community, among patients, among my students. And it's a comfortable position. It's a position that's full of life. And that's very strange. I'm not quite used to it. I'm kind of enjoying myself more than I've done for several decades. Does that make sense?
I'm very happy to hear it. And by the way, thank you for the plug for your book in my series, Jung and Politics.
I'm supposed to finish writing it before I plug it, aren't I? But yes.
I'm not worried about it. I'm just plugging it. How have you found being an open HIV/AIDS survivor in the Jungian world? Have you experienced this in a positive way, a negative way, a neutral way? Anyway, you get the point of the question, I'm sure.
Sure. I've never been treated badly about it at all. I think I tended myself to be rather grim about it and present it as a sort of tragic badge of honor. I actually remember some lines that Verena said to me in our supervision at one. Verena has been fantastic for me because, you'll pardon me speaking of you as though you're an object, Verena. Verena is extraordinarily powerful and can say things that will absolutely sort of blow your head apart. There was one point in a fairly early supervision session where she's looking through my notes saying, well, you're working with all of these patients, you seem to be giving them some direction and hope and opening things up. Why don't you do that for yourself? Which was a bit of a smack across the chops, right?
Yes. It's the kind of friendly comment for which Verena is famous.
Well, and what's so amazing is, so grateful, not merely because it's a powerful thing to say, but that had never occurred to me. How many decades is this, right? How ridiculous is that?
Yeah.
Right? So it's such a strange thing.
How was it for you being interviewed by Steph? What was it like?
It was a little strange and nerve-wracking. You know, I've been a lecturer for 30 years. I've performed on stage, this sort of thing. But I was just, I believe it was a day or two after or before, it was a day or two before graduation at the Institute. And we're sitting in the room where I'd had some of my final exams, and I'm being interviewed. And I kept asking him, really? You want me? Why do you want me? You know, I'm a babe in this area. It does.
Stefano, why did you want him?
Because he was the only one left available, so that's why.
I can't smack you from here. You're in a different city.
Okay.
But it does also reflect that Jungian thing, which has always been very exciting for me, that Jung himself said, look, life experience matters. It's not just training. And I do tend to assume that that validates what I do now.
Thank you. You're off the hook now.
Thank
and I'll move on to the next contributor that I'm going to ask a few things to. In case you're wondering why we are proceeding in this order, we're following the book, which, as far as I can figure it out, uses the sophisticated methodology of alphabetical order, which
Yes.
I very much approve. Just lay it out alphabetically and it will find its own sense. So the next person in this alphabetical order is Dr. John Beebe over there in San Francisco, who is undoubtedly the most experienced clinician here with a long history in psychiatry as well as in Jungian analysis. John, thank you for making time in your very busy clinical schedule to participate in this. So this is something that Stefano said to you, page 52. You touch upon dreams, integrity, and anima all at once. When I read that, John, I thought, that's John Beebe. He touches on dreams, integrity, and anima all at once. Stefano says, let's try to differentiate them. What is integrity? And you replied many things, but the bit that I liked and learned from that I want you to respond to is as follows. Integrity, you say, is entire in the sense of being untouched, complete, and of a piece morally. All of which under test means standing for something, living by values that endure for others to follow. As you can see, it's a very complex notion. 3 or 4 ideas connected with each other that have to be teased out. Are you still teasing them out?
Life work.
It's a life work.
A life
Sure.
work.
Yes.
A
How-
practice. It's a practice.
It's a practice. When you wrote your book, your masterpiece, Integrity in Depth, did this idea of integrity as a practice get picked up by the readers, by the reviewers, by your colleagues, and by the wider academic world, because the book made a big impact in the field of moral philosophy? Did they get this, that it was a practice, or were they thinking more about it as a definition, as a thing, if you see what I mean?
Well, we're still talking about it, so already that's a good sign. Thank you very much, Andrew, for dreaming it forward. It's a lot like the anima, which Jung, you know, it's so easy to dismiss Jung's anima concept as some kind of 19th century sexism, woman as other, and we can dispense with that safely. I guess it was only James Hillman who really said the anima is the centerpiece. And when I discovered that it's through the anima very often that integrity takes shape, and it's also through the animus that integrity is measured, then I realized that men and women both have anima and animus, as many others have said. And the anima is something I learned from Tom Kirsch, who talked about it. It's a life work. If it's the archetype of life as it's lived, we're talking about something that goes on in the course of a life for a very, very long, long time, in which you keep living what connects you to yourself and others and what doesn't connect you to yourself and others, and it becomes incredibly embodied. Something I was just talking to Paul in my mind. I wanted to say, Paul, that we lost someone, you and I, this year, and just the other day, Larry Kramer, who of course wrote The Normal Heart and was the man who did ACT UP and really led the anger at the Reagan administration, which was so, in America, which was so unwilling to deal with AIDS. I mean, and those were the days when the word gay didn't even appear in the New York Times until a certain period. I mean, it's really quite, one has to live through that. But I met Larry Kramer in 1969 when he had just arrived from in San Francisco and I was at a party and he was at the same party, and he had just been the producer of Ken Russell's film Women in Love, and I was introduced to someone who had gone to medical school and was just about to start a psychiatric residency, and he was looking me over. He's a very competitive man, and he was saying, well, I guess my producing Women in Love is my medical school, he was saying. But then we got into a conversation, and he said he'd been in analysis with Anna Freud, and that meant everything to him. And I asked him how she was about everything, including obviously his homosexuality, a lot of things. And it was wonderful to hear how she had let him be him, and how nice he felt she was, and how thorough, and how good she was at kind of analyzing the conscience that he had. And then I remember him looking at me and saying, don't forget about psychoanalysis, it's coming back. And those were days when people were saying psychoanalysis is moribund, and the fact that I was interested in Jung was just like somewhere off in outer space. I mean, it made no difference whatsoever. People just didn't do that. And it was 5 years later that people said, how did you know to go to Jungian analysis 5 years ago? You know, but that was what they were saying 5 years later. But, and I never forgot that his integrity, which he's famous for, was grounded in an analytic experience. So then when I got into the analytic community, I was shocked to see analysts not walking the walk, not living their practice with integrity. And I thought, isn't this a place where we're fought? If this is about analyzing the superego and the id and whatever, the archetypes, all of them, to get to integrity, and what's the disjoin? And that's where I felt like it's a practice, and it's the opening up through the anima of your only way to be you, and your only way to be you in relation to others. And if you don't live it, how can you practice it? And how can you, if you don't stand for something in that way psychologically, as already Larry Kramer, as a competitive, difficult young man, was already obviously, thanks to Anna Freud, in that practice. And if they could have that, why couldn't we have that? So that's probably why I ended up writing Integrity in Depth.
Time is a real enemy this evening. I have to move on soon, but I wanted to ask you, and I'm asking everybody, what was it like to be interviewed by Stefano Carpani? I wrote to all of the contributors and I said, did you give your standard answers, or was there something relational, something that happened in the interpersonal field between you and the interviewer? Could you expatiate on this question?
Well, first of all, it was a wonderful experience. It took place in Poland. I'd just given a lecture called Why Is This Real? Which I was very happy to write, to talk about, and will be published eventually, but which is about the reality of the psyche and how that becomes a practice, a question. And so I was sort of in that state, and then I was interviewed. We went off to a room, a philosopher's office, because we were in the philosophy department. And I just felt that whatever I was interested in saying was welcome. And I guess that defines the most perfect analytic space possible. And it just flowed out. It just was the easiest interview. I couldn't believe how much I said and how much I wanted to say. Some years ago, I reformulated the basic rule that the patient should not say everything that comes to their mind. What I feel is the real basic rule is that the patient should say anything that they want to say. And the analyst should also be able to say anything he or she wants to say. And if they can't do that, that's what they have to analyze. That's my basic rule. And there was this man, he'd read my unwritten paper on the new basic rule. Here we were, both able to say exactly what we wanted to say. And I'm a talkative person, and he let me say everything I wanted to say, and I still think he managed to say through his questions what he wanted to say. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I just felt so good.
Great. That's a lovely description and memory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
We move on now to the wild card here. The only person who is not a Jungian analyst, Susie Orbach, one of the most distinguished psychoanalysts and writers in the world, and a pioneer of feminist psychotherapy going back to the 70s. And Susie, this is going to be a very interesting little excerpt for you to look over and work over. Are you ready?
I try to be ready.
Okay. Stefano said to you at the end of a very long question, how are women today? And when I read that, I thought, my God, how are women today? And you said exactly the same. This is referring back to previous times. I think the whole issue of dependency and attachment and autonomy and work is still very much on the agenda. I come across young women who feel it's very bad to have any dependency needs. They feel very ashamed of them. They don't know whether their work should occupy a huge amount of their life or where it should sit. That's particularly women in their 20s and 30s. They have a judgment that what feminism means, or what the doors that we opened mean, is that they should be okay, whereas the world isn't okay. Do you remember that reply? Because I'd like
Yeah, it
you to...
sounds really different in your voice than in mine, I'd like to say.
That's reassuring. Why does work crop up
Well,
so
I mean,
much?
I think what I was probably talking about then was my dismay at the way that ambition had been foisted on young women without them knowing that ambition was something to problematize, that was a struggle, and that you can't, ambition is not really very interesting if it's just about you. And it's not very interesting in late capital. I mean, ambition is really interesting when you are in a struggle for both the development of self, but also the development of some kind of project and some kind of notion of a public contribution. I don't know if that's, if I'm
No, that
responding.
makes a lot of sense. So you're dismayed that women have interpreted the world these days as one in which they should pursue individual ambition, the career, the status, the salary, which may or may not be reasonable, but in the absence of a wider, more collective, more social, more political awareness and consciousness. And I'm wondering if this is where your idea, which many people watching will know, but many won't, of separated attachment comes in, because that would somehow allow for striving, but in relation, in attachment. Is that comment?
Yes and no. I mean, yes and no. No, there's the world of consumption in which not just young women, but young men are, and all kinds of sexuality, all kinds of gender politics, whatever, in which one is being encouraged to represent oneself as a commodity, as a brand, and in which instead of accomplishment or contribution, I'm repeating myself, one is a surface, absolutely the opposite of what John was talking about. Instead of life being a practice and psychoanalysis being a practice and relationship being a practice, one is a product. And I've seen that with young women in my practice, not so much with the 50-year-olds actually, who found that pretty unsatisfactory, who've got the boyfriend or the girlfriend and the job and the home and the polish and the this and the that, and whose experience is quite abject. And I think that's what I think I was referring, that's what I was responding to when Stefano asked me that.
Yes. There's a line further on. So you're not cut off, but you're not merged. That seems to be important. And I would take merger
Okay,
here.
so that's to do with the notion that Louise Eichenbaum and I developed, which I think could relate to local global, or could relate to interpersonal relationships, which is the struggle to understand that we are each other, but we also have separate identities, and we can only have our separateness in relation to one another. And so that's where our idea, because girls historically have been brought up to be merged and look after everybody else and not know who the hell they were, except by looking after everybody else and getting. But so I think our idea of separated attachment was to see ourselves as being connected but autonomous. And I feel that very much whether we're talking about friendships, families, political organizations, which is a very hard thing for people to do in politics, or in international initiatives, where there's respect for those that in the relationship between, or the dynamic tension between those things. But in the therapy, because I am, after all, an analyst, I'm actually interested in the little bits of therapy. I mean, I'm interested in the very tiny details of therapy and the therapy relationship. The idea of the person that I'm working with being able to be regarded within the therapy and within our relationship, so that there is a tender and yet fierce connection, which also allows the difference.
Yeah, I've got two questions for you to finish this off. The first is, what's it like to be with the Jungians?
Well, you know, I'm quite promiscuous, frankly.
So are some of us.
I think
I like it. I like it. I could learn from you guys. You know, I could learn a lot. I mean, if I had another life, I'd like to learn it all, but I can't. But I think there are so many ways in which we approach things with our own intellectual structures. But we're, in the end, talking about at least 70% of the time the same bloody thing.
Sure. What was it like doing this with Steph? Because I don't think the two of you have met, in fact.
No, as I remember, it was a very rushed day, but my days before COVID were unbelievably rushed. And I think I probably was I was probably much more being interviewed rather than having a conversation. And that's not Stefano's problem. That was my behavior. And for that, I apologize, because I didn't really get to know him and let him have his impact on me. You know, that's my failing. But I think that's what I can remember, because of just the nature of what work used to be like.
Yes.
Before I learned to say no to everything over COVID.
Yes. I thought the stress on different generations having different perspectives, different experiences, especially women, in the way the text has come out, is really helpful and useful. And I wouldn't say that Stefano got that out of you, but that theme flourishes in the interview.
I agree.
So let's move on. Thank you very much.
Stefano.
Andrew,
Thank you.
Andrew, you'll pardon me acting as a producer. We're a little out of order.
No.
I'm getting.
Oh,
Marianne?
are we? Should I?
Did you want to speak to Marianne? But it's up to you.
Yes, of course I did. Call it the effects of all the stress and strain I'm under that I've actually forgotten the alphabet.
Oh,
Marianne, my apologies. And Paul, thank you very, very much. Otherwise, God knows what would happen. It's, you know, you're like an old-fashioned prompter, you know, in the theater when somebody forgets their lines, which is what is happening now, but I'm going to get back to it.
And Andrew, isn't Verena also?
Yeah, Verena, of course, don't worry. Your chapter is called Easy Young, Individuation and Painting the Unconscious.
yeah.
Stefano said to you, Marianne, what is the shadow? And you replied, the shadow, with a question mark. It is in the personal unconscious on one hand, but it can also be the collective shadow at the collective level. So the personal shadow is a result of personal experiences. And when we want to individuate ourselves, we have to confront our personal shadow, which we can see very nicely in our dreams. But it comes also out in paintings and in sand play, of course. I'd just like to draw you out on how the shadow emerges specifically in processes to do with painting and sand play, experiential, imagination-based modalities of therapy. How specifically, what happens with regard to the shadow?
So we can see it, for example, in this image number 3 on page 180. This painting is related to a nightmare, and you can very nicely see that this that the male energy, yes, the male energy, yes, the male energy is black here, and the child is afraid. And while she was painting, so she stuck in this anxiety, and the painting helped her to transform this anxiety into something else, because she could see that this wolf who wanted to kill her in the dream could become very helpful and the kind of friend who gave her the sword. This was the big lack in her psyche, the courage, the differentiation in the situation when this was a girl who was caught by school anxiety, school phobia. She couldn't leave the house. And so she needed this wolf energy. In these two pictures, you can see that the wolf get red trousers and blue eyes. So he looked very friendly, and he also got color in the ears and in the mouth. It means that this first very empty and only black, yes, it's this picture. It became colorful and more vivid and much more friendly, and also more small when you compare the two paintings. In the first painting, the child is smaller and the wolf is very big, yes. And in the second painting, when she started to integrate this shadow, this male energy, which was before in the shadow and only dark, and making her a very painful anxiety, the wolf becomes smaller and much more human. He even is a kind of smiling, and also the girl is now smiling and much bigger. So the ego complex was growing, and by integrating this lack of male energy, the ego complex was growing. And so the whole girl, as the ego complex, got also blue shoes, and she got a skirt. Before, she was had empty trousers and empty feet, and after that, the second painting becomes much more colorful, and this means she could develop and show much more emotional life.
Yes. Can I just draw you out a little bit on sand play and
yes,
and painting?
yeah.
What proportion of your work is without sand play and painting? I mean, shall we say straightforward verbal therapy? What proportion, what percentage is straightforward verbal therapy, and what proportion involves sand play and painting?
So I would say 3/4 is verbal therapy. So I deal with dreams and other fantasies, and also the normal kind of conversation related to problems in everyday life, partnerships, in the profession, and so on. And painting is perhaps from the quarter of painting and sand play, it depends a bit also on the age of the persons. I would say painting is a lot of percentage of this last quarter, or perhaps third part, is from the adults, and the children like more to make sand play.
Yes.
Although I have also adults who do sand play and do paint.
Okay, that's very helpful. I'm going to ask you this same question. What was it like? What was the interview or conversation with Stefano like? How did you find it?
So I was a bit surprised. This was my main feeling, and I was very glad to speak with him. I found it very exciting that I could very openly speak to him. And I guess if it would have been another person, perhaps I wouldn't have been so open as I have been with him. Because
Yes.
with him, I have a very good relationship, a good chemical interaction. And so for me, it was very nice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And apologies for getting M and O muddled.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Of course
You're
it doesn't.
welcome.
No, of course it doesn't matter. I'm sure that a old style classical Freudian would want to know about my M and my O.
Yeah,
Verena.
perhaps.
No, it's just your MO. We don't have to worry about that.
My MO, yes. Verena, you were not interviewed for the book, but you wrote the preface for the book, and together with me, we seem to have become the endorsers or blurb writers of this book. So I cannot tell you what Stefano's question to you was, because there wasn't one. But I liked your summary, your analysis, if you like, about the book, or about the MO of the book. Thank you, Paul. The modus operandi. So what did Stefano Carpani do? He talked to men and women who have become Jungian analysts. He asked about their intellectual careers, but above all, what C.G. Jung means to them and how C.G. Jung is perceived in the present world. He asked about preferences and how they bring their special knowledge into psychotherapeutic practice. He also asked, among other things, what is love, which we haven't talked about. They are idiosyncratic interviews. And I can't get rid of the thought, you wrote, that Stefano was looking for models of Jung's analysts and continues to look for them, perhaps mentors as well. His hidden question may be, how is it possible to be a successful and satisfied Jungian analyst in this world? Do you remember writing this? I'm sure
I remember, sure, I remember. Because I was really thinking about what is he doing? He's doing interviews with such different people. And with some people he has really a dialogue, with some people he has not. And then I was thinking, what is his hidden agenda? And I think his hidden agenda is to find the Jungian identity. That is one point. The other point is, you have also seen that I was very much struggling with breakfast at Küsnacht. I was thinking, why the hell breakfast? And so I thought, like you in the beginning, It has to do, afterwards we will get a lunch from Stefano, and perhaps we don't we are too old to experience also when he's writing about the dinner. That is one point. But then I was thinking about breakfast you take after sleep. And my question was, does he think that we in Küsnacht are a little bit asleep and that he is now waking up us to show us with his kind of interviews, with his kind of YouTube, that we should wake up and open us up to the social media. And so, and I think this could also be an intention of him.
And if it is his intention, how do you feel about it?
Oh, I feel very good, because I think we are in a very good shape at the Jung Institute in Zurich. But in each generation, we get a little bit lazy, and we know how it is going on and what we are doing, and so. And then the young generation must come. Some rebels must come, and I think his initiative, his energy, his questioning, it's also a different style. Not a book you write a long time. You think about a phrase, is this now correct or not correct? It is quick. You are talking in a very quick way, and this is a different way, and I think it's good in our world, and so I like it.
Yes, I think also what you're bringing in, maybe this is just my opinion, your hidden agenda. It would be my hidden agenda. It goes as follows. I've been reading and writing a lot about economics. I'm going to do the salon in a couple of weeks on economics. John Maynard Keynes, the great economist, wrote, "In the long run, we are all dead." And I think what you're talking about is death, but
Yeah.
always death plus life.
Yeah.
Our generation in our 70s, who have been around, even dominant in the Jungian world for a long time, we're dying, even if we're not dying physically, although many are. Tom Kirsch was mentioned. He is dead physically. Do you think this is what's going on? There's a kind of death, life. I don't want to say rebirth because that's just a cliche, but there's some kind of death theme in this book.
Yeah, the death theme is in, but it is also the theme of transition. Mm-hmm. And I think what you are saying, we are dying, sure, we are the generation, we have been perhaps important for some time, and now we are leaving. And I think it has also to do with this virus, because the virus is in a way a walking dead. The virus is not alive, but it has such a big impact, and I think this is this death and perhaps yeah, I would say transition.
Yes, thank you. I think I have to keep an eye on the time, but can I just ask you not to talk about your professional or supervision of Stefano and so on, but about the book. What was reading it like for you? It's the same question I asked everybody, but what has it been like reading this book, reading all these people?
Well, I couldn't read it in one line. I took it, then I have been reading 2 pages, 3 pages, and then I left it again. And when I did it in this way, I found it very stimulating. Today, yes. I wanted to read a whole chapter from someone who is not attending here, and then I couldn't do it. So I think for me, it is a book, you open it, you get inspired, very often because it is a conversation. The ideas are not formulated in an extreme, accurate way. And so you start to think about. And so I think it's a very stimulating book, and I like the job you did this evening. You did a very good job, like usual, in picking up some quotations and asking people about. I think this gives the auditor, the people who are attending this Zoom meeting, the idea what could be, what they can find in the book. And so I hope they will buy the book, they will take the book and give it to their friends and so on, because I think Stefano did such a great job, and so it would be really great when he would have a great success with it.
I hope so. And if Verena Kast and Andrew Samuels are both saying, go and buy the damn book, there's no doubt that everybody will buy it. We have another 2 minutes, and then we have to stop. We started 2 minutes late, and we're going to go on another 2 minutes. Steph, hello.
Well, what can I say? I mean, I feel humbled. I want to thank you so much. I want to thank you, all the contributors. Yeah, because since 2017, I made more than 30 interviews now, not all made into the book. Now there are also the interviews about coronavirus. I want to thanks to a very special person, Andrea Scurati, who actually edited all the videos and also made the cover of the book, which I find it amazing. I want to thank my dear friend Elizabeth Leuenberger-Kies, who transcribed 10 out of 11 interviews. So this book without her would not be here. I want to thank Alina Mondini, my stepmother in Küsnacht, I would say, who offered me a place where to stay for 3 years. And obviously the donors that made this book possible, as well as Chiron. You asked me a question before, who are my the pillars in my education, in my culture? Well, let me answer it properly, because I was very emotional at the beginning, so I couldn't answer. I said the poets, of course, Thomas Bernhard, Sarah Kane from theater, Václav Havel, theater and obviously politics. Cinema, Emil Kusturica and Mikhail Haneke. Psychoanalysis, Verena Kast, Andrew Samuels, Renate Danis, Ursula Brasch, John Beebe, Susie Orbach, Erich Fromm, Wolfgang Girish, of course, the most modern one. Sociology, my Italian godmother and godfather, Mauro Magatti and Chiara Giaccardi, Ulrich Beck, John Thompson, Thomas Gittens, Zygmunt Bauman. Painting, Franz Klein and Emilio Vedova. They seem names, but are not names. They are me inside, you know. Every time I read a book or watch a painting is an experience. And I also want to underline something that you, Andrew, I think you wrote in 89 or 92. You paid attention to the fact that the founding fathers, and I would say also founding mothers of psychoanalysis, were in primis social critics, Kulturkritiker auf Deutsch. Well, maybe Jungians are not that much Kulturkritiker was, but I think this is very important. This is for me why the relational and the psychosocial approach is so important. So important.
You know, to that answer,
yeah,
will show clearly to people who don't know you why people who do know you love and respect you so much. Good night, everybody. It's time to leave the meeting. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.